What is up, guys? Welcome back to Think Shank. We are continuing the summer break take series, and like I said in the last video, we are going to take it in the order of seeding in the regular season. Could do it out of the playoffs. I thought it'd be more fun this way, and just even for mental tracking and forecasting into next year, we're just going to do it this way. So today, we are jumping into the Denver Nuggets. Of course, everybody will remember the end of their second round series against Minnesota. Honestly, it was one of the most exciting series I can remember, mostly due to a couple close games. There were a lot of blowouts, which might be counterintuitive, but the overarching storylines and synergy of different players, and Rudy Gobert missed a game and Mike Conley missed a game, and there was a lot of interesting things going on. Of course, you had the storylines on Denver's end with Jamal Murray shooting and Jokic erupting in Game 5 and all these things. So a lot of memories being made in here. And, of course, Denver being the reigning champs from the previous season where they pretty much cakewalked to a title, it was quite the interesting postseason run this past year. But before we jump into that, let's start quickly, same as last time here, with brief just quantitative measures over last season, the playoffs each round. I'll take you guys through rosters and indicators, pivot over to actual shooting, percentages and frequencies, and then look at some of the other kind of data points I was able to find before pivoting then into more of the analysis stuff. Trying to propose a logical framework here for kind of covering the whole comprehensive story. Regular season of the 2024 season last year, Denver finishes with 57 wins. Their net differential was fourth in the NBA at plus 5.9 points per possession. Offensive rating was fifth at 119. Defensive rating was ninth at 113. The regular season finish, I think, is worth kind of highlighting and revisiting really quickly here, because if you don't remember, the top of the West really became an absolute razor's edge for the seeding between Oklahoma City, Denver, and Minnesota. And Denver had all but locked up the first place seed when they beat Minnesota. Of course, Karl-Anthony Towns had his knee injury, but beating Minnesota all but assured it. But then, of course, the one and only Victor Wembanyama comes in out of nowhere with Devontae Graham and Keldon Johnson and all of those guys, and Trey Jones, and beating the reigning champs in Game 81, which effectively rendered Denver second, Minnesota third, Oklahoma City one. And there are, in my opinion, a lot of validated reasons behind why that specific loss that Denver took on in performance by Wembanyama and the Spurs drastically and dramatically impacted the ultimate outcome between the Titans of the Western Conference here. Denver were to have the one seed, of course, they would have ended up playing the New Orleans Pelicans. All things being equal, you can't really assume that, but playing a Zionless New Orleans team, that point differential, I believe OKC in that series was over 17 points per game. They absolutely blew them out of the water. That might have been dramatically worse for New Orleans, honestly. And then, of course, from there, you have Denver versus Dallas in the second round and yada, yada. Not as simple as just pegging it all in that, but those are the kinds of moments that, to me, I called it out and preached a ton about it on Twitter right after it happened. Those are one of those happenstance moments I feel like you read in a random, middle school history book about random facts that weirdly ended up dictating a lot of very significant outcomes. But congrats, Wemby, and I'm sorry, Denver. Going back now into the playoffs, 7-5 record. Their net differential was 10th at -1 points per possession. Offensive rating was 13th, again, out of 20 playoff/play-in teams. So sample size is 20, maybe gets a little wonky with the sample size and everything for the play-in teams like Sacramento that didn't end up making it out, but it's all supposed to be indicative rather than exact. But offensive rating was 13th out of 20th in the playoffs, 111 points per possession. Defense 7th at 112 points per possession. So specifically looking at Minnesota, they, of course, lose in 7 games. They take that 7-game loss at home in Game 7, which they had tried so hard to lock up, and of course they did successfully, but lose in 7 games. Their net differential in the series, only 3.4 points, and offensive rating was 109, a defensive rating 113. Going to the previous round against the Lakers, their favorite foe, they beat them in 5, so maybe, a little bit step back from before where they swept the Lakers in the conference finals 2 years ago now. But this time around, 5 games, +2, net differential, offensive rating 114, defensive rating 112. So big themes there to pull out quickly. Goes without saying, the net differential, they were 4th in the regular season, only 10th in the playoffs. And you see that primarily impacting, just like Oklahoma City, the offense. So the offensive rating dropped from 5th to 13th. I don't want to be too dramatic about that shift. Obviously, playoff defenses are considerably tougher. Guys are more locked in. There's more pressure. So the actual, offensive production and shot making is just going to take a hit. But going from 5th to 13th is pretty significant here. Looking at Minnesota specifically, well, actually both Minnesota and the Lakers, you have net differentials for the entire series, both series, ending up as under a 4-point difference across games, which particularly against Minnesota is interesting because there were so many blowouts. I'm actually kind of surprised it ended up being that close in the end. But the games that were close were very, very close, of course. And I don't know if it was a record or what, but the Lakers, I remember a stat, I think it was around 80%, 78% or something of that entire series. The Lakers were leading in the scoreboard in points, and time again, Jamal Murray hit a couple insane game winners, and he was incredible in those moments, not incredible outside of them. But Denver proved itself to be an absolute execution machine, coming back late in these games, and the Lakers, of course, not being able to hold on. So that series ends up only with a +2 differential. That really doesn't surprise me, again, because of how much of the time Denver ended up trailing. Next, let's move on to the actual roster here. Denver infamously had its death lineup equivalent, basically, of Jamal Murray, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. Coming off the bench in pretty concentrated stints was Christian Braun. Coming in, KCP, Michael Porter Jr., that 2-3 split, second-year player, or at least he was last year, coming out of Kansas. Super athletic guy, and we're going to talk quite a bit about him as we look into next season. But he was coming off the bench, averaging 17 minutes a game or so. Reggie Jackson saw his minutes diminish drastically throughout the extent of the postseason, I think for pretty good reason. He seemed very, very shaky in very tough moments, and Jamal Murray, of course, with his kind of hobbled knee as well. It was tough to feel pretty confident in his ability to kind of spearhead, lead the offense when Jamal was sitting, what have you. And then Justin Holiday, of course, coming in towards the tail end of that Minnesota series because the Nuggets just really, really needed threes. It is a pretty well-known construction that the Wolves' rim defense and mid-range defense is among the best in the entire league, and really their perimeter is their only, air quote, kind of chink in their armor, which once we get to them, we'll talk about Dallas there, but the Nuggets really just needed outside potency. And Justin Holiday coming in, he actually shot extremely well, although, of course, offering up some defensive kind of lapses there, especially on mismatches against Rudy Gobert in that series and having to intentionally foul, things like that. But this is all funneling into what I called out before, the offensive rating taking such a dip in the postseason. It ultimately became a function of we literally just need guys who can make shots in this series against the Wolves, and Justin Holiday found himself getting quite a bit of minutes. Starters differential in that death lineup there ended up being minus 6.9. Pretty sure there was some pretty crazy statistic about the on-off metrics for the starters being like minus 20 or something insane. I think the big difference here is I'm using cleaning the glass, and they infamously cut out garbage time and things like that. Particularly in that Minnesota series, there were some significant blowouts, and so I think that's why this starter differential is a little bit more normal, just because those guys were in there and kind of getting pummeled. And of course, Malone is infamous as well for riding out his starters. Minus 6.9, though, out of 20 playoff teams, that's actually the worst. And so, again, that kind of makes sense with the blowout numbers, etc. The offensive rating was 112.5. Defensive rating was 119.4. And so you can see where the minus 6.9 comes into play. The important thing to take away, though, is that the starter differential, even if it wasn't the exact technical blowouts included, like minus 20 or whatever it was, all else holding equal, cleaning the glasses, computations holding equal, they still had literally the worst differential of any lineup in the postseason at minus 6.9 points per possession. That isn't awesome. So let's double click into that now. Let's see what we can find. So on offense, we have the points per possession offensive rating I mentioned before, 111. That was 13th in the postseason. Effective field goal, 53%. That was 10th. Turnover percentage, 13%. That was 11th. Offensive rebounding percentage, 25%. 14th out of the 20 playoff teams, and then free throw rate, 16.4 attempts per 100 possessions, ended up being 14th. Defense now, 112 points per possession. That would be 7th in the postseason. Effective field goal percentage, 55%, 14th. Turnover percentage, 12.4, 11th out of 20, 23% offensive rebounding, or really defensive rebounding in that context, because we're talking about defense, ended up being 3rd. And then free throw rate, 18.9. Free throw attempts, it would be 9th. So big takeaways from that. For me, the first thing to call out here is the offense. I know that's going to be a continuing theme, but we're going to pick it apart and get to it. But the effective field goal percentage and offensive rebounding are probably the two biggest ones. Going up against the Los Angeles Lakers and then followed by the Minnesota Timberwolves, I don't know if it gets enough spotlight as far as flagging, hey, these are absolutely elite defensive teams, particularly when paired against Jokic ball and his downhill kind of pressure, give him a nice entry pass, force to help. If they're not going to bring help, I'm going to beat everybody one-on-one, that whole thing. You're going up against LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and then Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. But the effective field goal percentage, I want to say two things. Well, one thing I already kind of touched on is Jokic's ability to present enough downhill pressure in and of itself to bring the help and then actually score at the rim or the short mid-range. He really likes the short mid-range more, was just objectively going to be thwarted more than probably a lot of other teams because, again, you're going up against Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Cat, Rudy Gobert, tall guys also in Minnesota. I mean, Jokic went up against Kyle Anderson, Naz Reid as well, a whole host of guys. So as far as things go, that is just going to hurt your effective field goal percentage to begin with. But point number two is the woefully volatile shooting potency of both Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., I think, played an incredibly significant role in this overall offensive potency dip from the regular season into the playoffs. And that was not encapsulated any more clearly, in my opinion, than the Game 7 collapse against Minnesota, where you just saw Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic not being able to hit open threes. And, of course, even throughout that series more broadly, Michael Porter Jr. essentially doing the same, even after being white hot against the Lakers in the previous series. And so I'll touch on that a bit more in depth, but those are initial thoughts on the field goal percentage piece. The offensive rebounding percentage is also tied into, I think, their matchups here again, Anthony Davis, probably a top 3 rim protector, probably Wemby and then him and Chet, pretty close to each other there. Everybody knows that Jokic loves to clean up his misses when he's in that short mid-range, and he really utilizes his ability to understand where his misses are going to go to immediately put it right back up. Doesn't need to bring the ball down, never really does. And so that is just an interesting indicator when you think about that really being a key driver of Jokic's potency, is not only being a generational finisher in the short mid-range, but he cleans up so many of his misses so well. So those are the 2 things I'd call out there. The offensive rebounding too, I mean, on the defensive end between Gordon and Jokic, I think are really notable there, ending up being 3rd in defensive rebounding, not necessarily something that maybe most people assume or align with Jokic and Aaron Gordon as far as getting all these rebounds, or even MPJ, so that is a pretty helpful indicator there. Next, I want to pivot over into the playoff shooting component, one of my favorite parts of this kind of approach that I'm doing here. Let's start off with offense quickly. Their rim shooting efficiency, or just accuracy, of 20 playoff teams, they were 10th at the rim, 9th in the mid-range, and 14th from 3. Their frequency was 8th at the rim, 14th from the mid-range, and then 14th from 3. Easy thing to call out there is the 3-point shooting. I think that this matters a lot. 14th and 14th isn't amazing in either direction. However, if you are aware of Denver's playing style, they actually really favor higher frequency shooting at the rim or in the mid-range. For Denver specifically, as I mentioned, the short mid-range is Jokic's office. He is not an Anthony Davis or, I guess, a Rudy Gobert or something like that, where the guy needs to be within 3 feet of the hoop a lot of the times to get it up there. I mean, AD's got more range, he's super long, but you understand my point, is the mid-range is going to be a healthy source of offensive production for Denver. The trick is to armbar the opposing team's defense into essentially waving a white flag on stopping it, to then therefore introduce help defensive schemes to thwart Jokic, which then, of course, unlocks kickouts, cross-court passes, all of the beautiful passes that we see and are accustomed to seeing from Jokic. Being 14th in efficiency from 3 is very much a downgrade from the regular season. Denver in the regular season, I should have this up, but I don't, but I believe they were in the top 5 or 6 in the NBA in efficiency or accuracy. But again, their frequency is traditionally bottom 3rd. And that's because, again, nobody can stop Jokic. It's like essentially that simple. And so that's why, even as we'll get into the KCP stuff and replacing him now that he's gone or whatever, I mean, KCP is only averaging like 8-9 points a game in the playoffs, and he's a 3-and-D guy. And there's a reason why he's not scoring that much, is because he's just not taking that many shots, because Jokic is really close to unstoppable, really close to the rim in a lot of these matchups. And so you see kind of the symptoms of this being 14th in efficiency when, again, I believe they were in the top 5, top 6. It was just that their efficiency was really low, because why do you need to take the chance there? You should always be favoring your generational finisher in the short mid-range or the short lobs to Aaron Gordon, super, much higher percentage shots. I think there's a misconception that the fatigue and a host of other reasons that went into Denver's collapse in Game 7 against Minnesota, that Denver just started falling back on threes a ton, and they didn't have the energy to drive to the cup, and it was way too many threes because they were tired. But let's take a look at their first-round playoff series against the Lakers quickly. So the three-point percentage there, again, efficiency was 31.4%, and frequency-wise, it was 36%. Against Minnesota, it was 36.8%. Frequency was 34%. So in that Minnesota series, they shot about 5 percentage points better from 3, so better efficiency, and they shot about 2 percentage points less frequently from three. So they actually shot better from three and shot less frequently against Minnesota than the Lakers in the playoffs. That is a pretty interesting quantitative insight to me. Again, because that misconception of Denver getting fatigued and exhausted and just chucking shots, they weren't even necessarily chucking that many shots. They were missing open shots. I would say it was far more the bigger, more significant enabler of that third quarter collapse in Game 7 and then fourth quarter as well. To double click on that even more, in that Lakers series, their corner three-point efficiency was 30.4%, and then their non-corner three-point efficiency was 31.7%. Against Minnesota, it was 43.1% from the corner and then 34.1% from the non-corner. So if you compare the two as well, a little bit of an interesting note is that against the Lakers, they were 13 percentage points worse from shooting the threes. And so you think about the defensive matchups and Rui and whoever really closing out really effectively to the corners and some of these cross-court passes by Jokic. The Nuggets just shot extremely poorly from the corners against the Lakers, but shot over 40%, over 43% against the Wolves from the corners. And then from the non-corners, it was pretty close to the same, but the Nuggets shot, noticeably better as well from the non-corners. So in totality, the Nuggets were able to shoot pretty considerably better from three against the Wolves than the Lakers. And then even more specifically, their corner three-point shooting was over 13 percentage points better against the Wolves than the Lakers. I'd have to go back and trove through those defensive assignments for who was Xing out and closing out to the corners here. But I just found that worth noting. The corners were absolutely, red hot, white hot, whatever you want to say, against Minnesota, comparative to the Lakers here. So, misconception, shoot it with a gun. I myself had kind of assumed that as well, that they were just super tired and were chucking these shots. And yes, they were, even though they were open, they were missing them because they were tired. There's definitely some merit in that. But I think kind of just shoving most of that collapse off to, well, they were just kind of missing their threes the whole series, and that was really the hamstring for them lose. No, it wasn't. They literally shot 37% from three overall, and then basically on the same volume against the Lakers series. And then in that Lakers series, their accuracy was 5 percentage points worse. So they actually shot better from three around the same volume against the Wolves than the Lakers. Interesting. Moving over to the shooting defense now, quickly. The Nuggets' efficiency at rim defense was 14th out of 20 playoff teams, 14th in the mid-range, and then 5th from three. The frequency by which they were attacked or shot against in those regions was 16th at the rim, 7th from the mid-range, and then 4th from three. In general, this is kind of what I expected here. Their perimeter defense was extremely potent, having the length and size of Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, KCP, frantically running around, able to, close out, do very well there. But their rim defense and mid-range defense, once guys were actually able to penetrate that outer barrier of the defense there, teams were able to finish quite well. And by quite well, 14th and 14th out of 20 teams, that's, below average. Alas, we are talking about LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, or whatever, and, of course, Anthony Edwards, so who, under 6'6", is the most prolific at being able to get to the rim by himself. All right, so the story here now of the overall playoffs, I think the most important thing to talk about first here is the note about the fatigue and the third quarter collapse that the Denver Nuggets had in Game 7 of that Minnesota series. I think there are just a few things I want to call out here. Number one is I have another video on my channel from the post-games following Game 7 where I basically just spliced together a bunch of the post-game interviews from Denver and Minnesota. And the reason I'm calling that out is Michael Malone himself flagged the entire list of exact reasons why he felt they had their collapse. And of course, having a 20-point lead in Game 7 at home, reigning champs. And here's what he said. The shortened offseason after winning the title, coming right back into the season is what it is. The 82-game year for the starters, back to what I mentioned before about the rat race to close out the regular season. Denver knew that it wanted to have home court advantage against Minnesota or Oklahoma City, and it came down to literally the difference in one loss in the second to last game of the entire season, and they were right, which is kind of poetic to me that they end up needing the Game 7, and of course, what happened. The tough round 1 matchup against the Lakers, I think he rightfully flagged that the Lakers were far better, in my opinion, than their record proved. They had one bad stretch during the regular season, but everybody knows LeBron James coming into the postseason, his brain, his ability to floor raise his team, even with substandard role players, in my estimation, D'Lo, Austin Reeves, Rui, especially when you think about the two-way or lack of two-way capabilities there. That is a very formidable matchup. And we saw it on the court because Denver was trailing in that series for, like 80% of the time. That's going to wear you out if you have to continuously fight and climb your way out of all these holes in the playoffs of all settings. The Jamal knee injury, of course, he seemed a little bit wobbly, obviously didn't complain too much about it, but it was pretty clear throughout most of the playoffs he was a little bit dinged up there. And then, of course, when you get into the Minnesota series, finding themselves in a 0-2 hole in that series to start off, having to roar back, summon the inner demons, and storm back to take 3 games straight against Minnesota. I definitely think a couple absences on the Wolves side with Conley, definitely helped. But, still having to do that in the playoffs with the expectations, all of this stuff, everybody chattering and talking and glorifying and all of that stuff. But digging yourself into that hole, having to come back and do that, it all feeds into fatigue. What I want to do is reiterate or reinforce an earlier note about Denver's shot taking and their overall kind of offensive icing almost in that third quarter. Again, they found themselves with a 20-point lead with like 10 and a half minutes left in the third quarter, and then the Wolves go on a 28-9 run or something for the rest of that third quarter. I would also recommend checking out on my channel, shameless plug, I have a pretty cool compilation of that insane comeback just because it was so honestly unforgettable. That was easily the most exciting component of the entire postseason, and I put some piano under it or whatever. So if you're interested, take a look. It's on my channel. I think like 30+K views, something like that. I think misconception number one is that the fatigue ultimately led them to settle for too many threes or bad threes or both. And I think that is a bit misleading, because rewatching, and feel free again to look at my compilation where you can literally see the shots that Denver was taking. These shots weren't bad shots. They were just not going in. And if you want to point to anything, you can point to the fatigue hurting their concentration, mental focus in terms of actually landing and hitting a bunch of these shots. Jamal Murray in transition pull-up, he had between 6 and 8 feet between him and the next guy that was trying to close out on him. Jokic pretty similarly, although not even in transition. They were kind of giving it to him once, obviously, the Wolves smelled blood in the water and realized nobody was going to be making outside shots, so they were letting him have it. For this team, with as much offensive potency as we have seen them demonstrate, I don't think that it was a schematic or decision-making series of errors. I think it is extremely fair to point to the fatigue factor mattering mentally in terms of actually making the shots, the last, 2%, whatever it is, of actually making these shots. Most of the time, if you've watched Jokic and the Nuggets, it's like 98% get Jokic going downhill close enough to the basket and then draw the right enough attention, then kick it out, right? These should be automatics. Obviously, that didn't necessarily happen. So, missed open looks, not exactly smothered by Minnesota's defense. Of course, it goes both ways. I think Minnesota, again, I think the majority of it was they were trying to just tread water as best as they could defensively, but these are open shots by proven shooters that just weren't going in. And so that, I think, should be a big spotlight truth or takeaway from this is all of this fatigue from the regular season, shortened off season, into the rat race to end the regular season, trailing 80% of the time or whatever it was against the Lakers in round one. Didn't do yourself any favors there. Coming into the Minnesota series, falling down 0-2 and kind of getting gobsmacked in that first game with Anthony Edwards dropping 40+ and all of the noise and the hype and all this stuff, having to summon everything it took to clap back with 3 straight and ultimately, of course, go into Game 7 here. I think it would be a much bigger concern to me if it had to do with getting smothered defensively and not even being able to generate good quality looks. This, to me, was a pretty pure case study in physical fatigue infecting mental fatigue, ultimately manifesting in not being able to deliver the last 2-3% of actually just knocking these shots down. A lot of these shots for these level of offensively potent players should have been made. I don't know if it's fair to say, again, the Wolves just smothered them and took the whole game by the throat and Denver choked or whatever. I guess you can say choked, but in the Lakers series as well, they had proven to be an execution masterclass in coming back in all these games. I think given that data, given the quality of looks they were able to get but weren't making, I find it hard to completely dispel the idea that Malone was wrong and fatigue wasn't the primary culprit. That being said, it was still pretty incredible. So the Jamal game winners, even though he was shooting very poorly, which I'll get into, and then the Game 5 eruption, I just have to give a subtle nod to for Jokic. I think that might have been the second best individual playoff performance I've ever seen in my entire life. That third quarter, I believe, where he scored, 10 points and 8 of them were consecutively. And I think within that stretch, or maybe not entirely within that stretch, I believe it was within the quarter, I mean, he was taking it at Naz Reid, Kyle Anderson, and Rudy Gobert virtually one-on-one, and it was clear as day. The Wolves were like, come on, you can take him one-on-one. We're not going to help. If you can beat our guys one-on-one, so be it. And Jokic ate them alive. And that last bucket and one on Rudy, I believe, where he took him in there and then did just like a head fake and flipped it up behind his head. And it kind of like danced around the rim before going in. And it was another hilariously awkward Jokic just bomb. And, it was at home in Denver, too. It was one of the most electric moments of the entire postseason is seeing that guy just eat that entire roster to bits. And they just took turns getting eaten alive. So props to him. So let's talk about the shooting now quickly. Jamal's volatility, it can't be understated how much in totality I believe that Jamal Murray deserves to shoulder the majority of the blame for the amount of time they trailed against the Lakers and then ultimately in that Minnesota series. So starting with the Lakers, pretty promising start, even though his efficiency wasn't great. 24 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 47% true shooting, 29% from 3. Really not incredible efficiency, production was there. Minnesota, 18 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 48% true shooting, 33% from three. Big thing to highlight there, 48%, 47% true shooting. Obviously, that takes into account free throw shooting, which Jamal's like a 90% free throw shooter. I don't have his attempts, but I don't think it was really a huge deal. Again, on that hobbled knee, I don't think he was really trying to follow bait that much or getting himself there. If you have a sub 50% true shooting percentage and you are up for a contract / your usage rate exhibits or points to you being the second most important player on this team, and you're shooting sub 33% for 2 entire playoff series, including the second one, only 18 points a game, that is concerning. I know the contract year stuff is a thing and a whole topic of conversation for Denver people, and that totally is fine. It makes sense. Strictly speaking from a sort of bench side theoretical analysis perspective, even though Jokic is indisputably the greatest player on the planet right now, and in a lot of ways willed this team because, again, of Jamal's volatility, and I'll get to Michael Porter Jr. in a second, the fact that Jokic was able to drag a lot of this, at least offensive production-wise, to a 7-game series against the best defense, at least in the regular season, testament to him. But it also, in my opinion, is a testament to how much, not even that much better, he probably had to shoot in order to ultimately help his team get to the conference finals. So that level of volatility, it's very, very simple, just is not going to cut it. And then that is exacerbated even more by Michael Porter Jr. So in the Lakers series, MPJ, maybe the best postseason performance I think I've seen as a collective series or series body of work there. 23 points, 8 rebounds, 1 assist, 70% true shooting, 49% from three. Dude was absolutely flamethrowing. In the Minnesota series, took a pretty sizable step back. 11 points per game, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 50% true shooting, 33% from three. Interesting parity there between him and Jamal in that 47-50% true shooting range, and then about 33% from three. I think MPJ had said at some point over the summer, basically them losing was all his fault. Michael Malone very quickly, in his passionate way that I honestly really, really love, said, hell no, that's not even close to the case. If you look at his performance in that Lakers series, it was unbelievable. That dude could not miss a three if his life depended on it, and it was absolutely soul-sucking for the Lakers, again, given they were leading so much of that series. And I completely agree with him, MPJ and Jamal. Jamal averaging 24, MPJ averaging 23. I mean, those are borderline Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum numbers in the postseason. So you just don't even have to wear Jokic the fuck out to beat the Lakers, which is really, really key. But you go to Minnesota, of course, MPJ takes a significant step back. Overall volatility here between those two players, I would say on the offensive end of the floor, generally are the second and third best offensive options and weapons that Denver has. Again, Aaron Gordon had his moments in the Minnesota series, but I'm saying generally speaking, having both of those guys really struggle in that second round series and still get to the 7th game, which they slaved and killed themselves in order to get to close out the regular season, and Jokic and them still build a 20-point lead in Game 7 a minute and a half into the third quarter is unbelievable. And I just have to just reiterate it as far as reinforcing Jokic's incredible, just generational talent here. You don't have your second and third best players shooting 50% true shooting wise. I think it was closer to 40% effective field goal percentage from Jamal and MPJ. And then you still, against the best rated defense as well, you still drag them to a 7-game series. Also to mention climbing out of an 0-2 hole to start it, I guess I am subconsciously twisting this into a Jokic jerking sesh, but it's one of those moments where you look through the numbers again and you're like, oh my God, the second and third best guys really sucked. And goddamn, this team was so close to still beating the top-rated defense, Minnesota Timberwolves. It absolutely blew my mind. Obviously, you think about it both ways, though. Karl-Anthony Towns was pretty much ass until the last, 2 games. So, balances out. All right, quickly now, offense, defense. Offense, I basically was already freaking out about this. All-time floor raiser continues his reign. One-on-one defense against Jokic won't really work unless literally it's against Victor Wembanyama, potentially Chet, Anthony Davis, probably it. And again, talking about work, work means holding Jokic to 26, 12, and 11. So, take some liberty with that. But we saw that against the reigning, defensive player of the year, absolutely ate him alive, particularly in Game 5 of that Minnesota series. And then in the previous series, taking on, at that time, I think still justifiably so, the second best rim protector in the NBA, and Anthony Davis. He's still averaging 26, triple-double territory. So say that to say Jokic is unbelievable, and I don't think there is a single soul in the world that can reasonably be a holdout on the fact that Jokic is the greatest player, but it's worth just nodding to when it comes to the offense. Because of his immense rim or short mid-range pressure, I should say, basically within 15, 16 feet, bringing that defensive pressure, bringing help, etc., Jokic has effectively mastered and mapped the entirety of the floor and the matrix of it and how to navigate his ways out of both one-on-one defense when guys are trying to pull some stuff on him, but also a team-level defensive adjustment that is going to force him to make the right read instantaneously, cross-court passes, etc., and that is ultimately why I believe LeBron James said during the regular season last year on his Mind the Game pod, RIP, that Jokic is truly a one-on-one. And the reason behind that is not because he's a 3-level scorer, and it's not even just because of his generational passing ability. It is because of his ability to present an unbelievable amount of rim pressure that isn't even at the rim. Again, I should probably rephrase that, but it's like an unbelievable amount of pressure to get to his spots in the short mid-range, the unbelievable touch to make these shots, and awareness to follow it up and put these shots back in, getting his own offensive rebounds. Pairing that kind of stuff, put it in a box and put the box over here, with generational passing and vision and feel for the game as far as defensive adjustments, bringing help or whatever. He is essentially the Luka Doncic, right? Just put in reverse. Luka is outside in, Jokic is inside out. You are going to have to show him your hand, to which then he will instantaneously process what your hand is and then make the right read every single time. And even though Karl-Anthony Towns gets a lot of admiration and love for very bizarrely being apparently the only one who can kind of effectively slow him down a lot, I mean, Jokic put him pretty close in foul trouble relatively every single game. That is obviously a known weakness of Cat, but on top of that, I mean, Jokic averages for the series, again, a triple-double. Like, we're talking 26.3, 11, 12, whatever it is. So there is no way to really stop this man, is my point. And he has effectively held most defenses and forcing them to come up with innovative schemes like having a tall double big lineup in order to even thwart him. That is literally changing the complexion of rosters and the schematics defensively of teams in the NBA because of this singular guy who wanted to get the fuck home to Serbia 2 days after, or the day after making, making history as Denver's first title. I think was it actually? I think it was literally right after. He was like, when was the parade? It's Thursday, and he was like, God damn it. he's literally changing what teams have to look for in guys and all of that. So props to him. Closing the Lakers in 5, even though Lakers, right, very hungry, leading this team that was trailing for that percentage of the game and series, to beat the Lakers only in 5 games, despite, again, Jamal and MPJ's struggles in that Minnesota series, leading them to get out of that 0-2 hole. And then the last little bullet there is the 40 minutes a game averaged in both series. And so, granted, he's not alone, but I just kind of feel like that's another little Timbit thing where, I don't know, like Jason Tatum gets a lot of love, right? Doesn't ever miss games, and he plays all these minutes and all this other stuff, which is, I'm not trying to belittle that. I'm sorry. I just feel like the Jokic stuff, not athletic, not great on defense, not durable, slow, like insert any sort of derogatory observation or narrative about Jokic, but then the guy averages, over 40 minutes a game. And then you can even validate that with the Olympics as well. So, like the guy is able to be extremely, extremely durable, even in high stakes playoff games with a usage rate that was higher than LeBron James in that series. It was higher than Anthony Edwards in their series. Like the guy is very, very durable. I think we kind of overlooked that a little bit. The last thing I want to mention here is that Minnesota's Jokic ball counter with Cat guarding Jokic and then Gobert sagging off, that whole thing is not a silver bullet. And some data to just reinforce that here is that in the short mid-range, in terms of effective field goal percentage, Nuggets shot 44% against the Wolves versus 47% against the Lakers. And then at the rim, their effective field goal percentage against the Wolves was 62%. And then 67% against the Lakers. Point being, this whole Jokic stopper thing and Karl-Anthony Towns being incredible and the whole Rudy Gobert and double big thing, we're talking about, what, on the order of 5 to 3 percentage point difference in actual effective field goal percentage at the rims. And I don't necessarily feel like they really mattered. I don't think that the Lakers really employed that LeBron guarding Jokic thing enough and trying to get guys like Rui Hachimura to be dexterous. Rui can't really guard threes and up, so having him in there, he had some shining moments 2 years ago, but that was weird, didn't really hold up. I just say that to say, like, look, you're not going to stop Jokic. You can slow him down. And in this particular instance, in my opinion, there were quite a bit of extraneous factors that wound up infiltrating not Denver's offensive scheme. Again, Jokic ball, you're either going to play me one-on-one or bring help, and I'm going to make the right pass. That scheme was not disproven by that third quarter collapse in Game 7 to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They miss a majority of wide open threes that I think are incredibly valid to reason off as the accumulation of fatigue and all the reasons I've expelled before around why those actual shots weren't going in that particular moment. And so that is why my ultimate takeaway here for the Nuggets when it comes to offense is that Jokic ball has not been stopped. The Wolves got out of there by the skin of their teeth and a 3.4 point differential from a series that started off 0-2 to then lose 3 straight. And even from looking at the shooting regions on the floor, the short, mid-range, and the rim effective field goal percentage do not at all indicate that Jokic was truly, truly thwarted or completely shut off from being able to dominate in the same exact fashion, even with the new innovative concepts from Coach Finch and the Timberwolves. Defense, quickly, only real big thing here I want to call out here is that the team defense that the Nuggets possess, and even with losing KCP and bringing in Christian Braun, I think it's still going to be great. And I love it for a couple different reasons. 1, their length. 2, their athleticism. And 3, their role specialization. This really looks like a biology test that was made in a petri dish, and you have every guy being able to effectively own a very clean proportion of real estate as far as the opposing lineups go. And, it really seems the best equipped outside of, your Bostons, or maybe going up against, I don't know, you have shout out Ben Simmons or somebody who's a point guard at 6'10" or something. Obviously, he has his own, problems on offense, so the defense isn't necessarily the same thing, but you know what I'm saying. Against most teams, this is going to be an extremely, extremely formidable defensive lineup. And I think it all starts, in my opinion, with Aaron Gordon. Incredible strength, incredible versatility. He is going to be your Jason Tatum, can definitely guard bigs for short stints, can also switch on to smaller guards, even going all the way up to your ones and point guards, in my opinion. And then, of course, on top of that, moving backward, you have Michael Porter Jr., who's literally 6'10" and super, super long, and is, in my opinion, he's definitely proven to be able to uptick his defensive potency and effort and awareness come the playoffs. Getting those blocks against the Lakers and what we saw even during their title run, I think, are indicative of that. And that length from both Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. help in denying entry passes from the perimeter. And I think if you were to look at, let's say, Dallas, for example, trying to get Kyrie Irving to get Luka Doncic the ball on the block, it just makes it really tough with these super long guys to even get the ball kind of in there, which leads you to basically necessitate your pick and rolls coming downhill, playing in that mid-range game, probably needing to take very tough mid-range shots. But, very similar to what Jamal Murray got the treatment of, is having Jaden McDaniels just hulking behind you like the boogeyman and chasing you all around the mid-range and stuff like that. All of that length from Denver's kind of 4-3 really makes it possible. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the Christian Braun thing, where coming in for KCP, obviously the offensive production, I'll get into that in a second, but I think it's really important to point out Christian Braun's athletic gifts are absolutely undeniable, and his motor, only being now a third-year player next year, the guy tries his absolute ass off, which KCP definitely did as well. But I would argue, with state in their careers, age, all of that, Christian Braun is even more athletic, and I think his instincts are also extremely, extremely elite on the defensive end. Proved a lot, even getting minutes as a rookie, right, in their title run. I think they are going to be potentially not a better defensive team. There are definitely opportunities for Jamal with his knee and health and things like that and being in shape or whatever. But I actually really, really, really like Christian Braun as a defensive specimen to be implanted into this lineup. And I think it augments those big three buckets that I talked about with length, athleticism, role specialization. I mean, all these guys know their roles very, very well defensively, and the fact that Christian Braun has been able to get the experience playing alongside of these guys up until now is only going to help. Great. Pivoting now to the forecasting for next season quickly. 2025, the projected win total for the Nuggets is 52.5. I have them pretty much right there, and I think ultimately the seeding is going to render them between second and fourth in the Western Conference. The reason why I have 2 to 4, usually I'm trying to keep it one seed or the other, mostly because of Memphis, frankly, and we're going to have to figure that out, and I'm going to pivot to that in a second here. But I can see a world where guys end up learning from their experience this past season with wearing themselves out, worrying about home court advantage. And it's going to be really interesting to see how much of an investment they make in preserving that super high seed and really trying to kill themselves in order to get that after, obviously, everything that happened last year. That being said, Memphis definitely has some rolling into form and all of that thing to iron out coming into this season. I think Dallas, right, is going to come into this season now full season with mostly their intact roster as opposed to the first half of last season, not having Gafford. PJ Washington, etc., when they had one of the best defenses in the league. So that's why I have a 2 through 4. Honestly, it would not surprise me at all if Denver ends up as a 4 seed, potentially even a 5 seed. Again, depending on, how much liberty they're giving to Christian Braun to figure his own stuff out, integrate him into the system, feeling very confident about their chances in the postseason, regardless almost of seeding anyway. So all of that funnels into, I have their floor being the second round again. I only really say that as a function of, did we learn our lessons from last year about fatigue and pacing ourselves, and where do we want to invest in the Christian Braun coming in and stepping in stuff, and then vice versa. Minnesota, Memphis, Oklahoma City. Now we have a couple new players entering the game here. And this is what I want to double click on quickly. So Minnesota, we're all aware, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, they're effectively running it back, and I only think they're only going to get better. Of course, Karl-Anthony Towns notoriously had never been to the conference finals or even won a playoff series. During his time in reign on the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think he's going to I think he's going to come back a lot more comfortable. I think for him specifically, being in that position late in the playoffs alongside of a 22-year-old who is obviously electric. I don't want to say it was embarrassing, but it was one of those things in his mind where I feel like the pressure was affecting him more. That's my own theory, and I feel like he is going to be better next season in the postseason. All of this, again, is funneling into why I still think it's possible Denver loses in the second round. But then on Denver's side, I think the bad blood is actually a good thing. I think Jamal Murray has proven himself to be pretty effective, even though, the efficiency might take a hit. But when you think about late in the games and the fact that Jokic alone is going to drag this team pretty close on the scoreboard, and then, of course, needing those knockout punches from his right-hand man in Jamal Murray, the fact that, Ant, Jaden McDaniels waved him goodbye in Game 7 and all of that stuff on their home floor. Jokic gets in Ant's face, and super immature from Ant and all of that stuff. I don't blame them at all. I'm just saying I would be very, very, very intrigued and excited for a potential rematch here. But main takeaway is their build is the same. They're going to have the same obstacles for Denver. Of course, they get off scot-free this past year. We'll see what happens next time. Also extremely interesting is Memphis. Everybody knows they took Zach Edey 9th in this past draft. Huge person. He's like 7'4", and that is going to be paired alongside of Triple J, and I think that's going to be extremely interesting in how they go against Denver on the defensive end of the floor. I don't think it's any secret, and I hope nobody forgot how incredible Memphis's defense was, even back, right, with Steven Adams, Triple J getting Defensive Player of the Year, all of those things. And I haven't really fleshed out this theory yet. There's not a ton of grounding to it, but for some weird reason, I feel like Triple J is probably the best candidate to upend Karl-Anthony Towns or replace Karl-Anthony Towns as the random one-off guy who can slow down Jokic, sort of, but not actually. It's just maybe it looks that way in the eye test, but the actual field goal percentage and shot creation is basically the same. You know what I mean? I just kind of feel like Triple J's, his instincts are incredible. It is also a funny case study of similarity with Cad in the foul stuff. If he can keep his hands to himself, and I don't know, Jokic is probably going to get him in the doghouse. But Edey, on the other hand, I feel like is getting flack preemptively because a lot of folks think, oh my God, he's a rookie. Jokic is just going to eat him alive, get him in foul trouble. It doesn't matter. We saw Gobert, Defensive Player of the Year, yada, yada. I think Edey's different because of his sheer profile, size, length at 7'4", is just literally going to be able to contest shots at a better degree than Gobert without needing the speed to actually keep up with Jokic. Because Jokic isn't fast, right? And I think it's pretty clear to see a big reason why Victor Wembanyama is so special, for example, is because he is extremely quick at an even longer size than Zach Edey. Zach Edey is not the fastest guy in the world, but he's also enormous. But he's also like thick. His profile is very big. He's going to be one of the best screen setters in the NBA. It's no issue. So what he doesn't possess in quickness, I feel there is a possibility he is able to compensate for in just sheer size in terms of actually making it difficult on Jokic to finish and hurting his shot quality near the basket. And that's assuming, again, that Memphis does the whole like switch, Gobert or the center onto Aaron Gordon and whatever, even if Jokic does get by whoever does get by Triple J. I mean, Edey's just going to be a really tough guy to finish around the rim for. And then in addition, and potentially even more importantly, is the offensive rebounding. It is not a secret to anybody at this point that Jokic is probably third best superpower is his instincts and ability to clean up his own misses and others near the basket. You're going up against a 7'4" guy in Edey, who again, with his profile, girth, and just size, is, that could actually be a pretty significant detriment, I feel like. Well, it's a chance. Again, he's a rookie. I'm not saying it's going to be world beating. I'm just saying them drafting him actually, in my opinion, situates them as a better matchup for Denver than Dallas, for example. Quickly over to Oklahoma City now, picking up Isaiah Hartenstein. This is all funneling into the same line of thought here. But Chet, Hartenstein, that pairing, Aaron Gordon to Jokic, and Chet on Aaron Gordon and Hartenstein on Jokic, Hartenstein really demonstrated a lot of defensive prowess and ability here. We'll see how well he does hold up there. Dragging Aaron Gordon away from the rebounding, I think, is also very, very important because Chet is a proven perimeter threat. That is very important, especially when you think about the Minnesota series when Cat was sucking ass and making threes, and it just helped Aaron Gordon rebound more because it's just like, okay. I don't think Chet is going to struggle as much. I believe in his consistency, even though he is so much younger and everything, that when they inevitably do play Oklahoma City, Chet's ability to drag Aaron Gordon away, I think, is actually going to matter. And then the last note there is really the iHeart post New York Knicks just hustling his ass off. And, he kind of similar with your Alex Caruso's and Christian Browns and all this shit. Like, all these guys just play at 110%. You watch iHeart running around the court, even in a half-court offense. The guy is constantly trying to set screens, position himself, box out, get boards. Great offensive rebounder. Everyone knows that. But I think just his overall activity, he has a similar degree of motor, in my opinion, to Jokic, where Jokic as well is able to constantly pretty much move around. Granted, he's not sprinting or whatever, but I like the idea of iHeart's battery, if you will, matching up and against Jokic's, even from a durability standpoint, thinking about the playoffs a year from now. Lakers, I also have LBJ, AD. I know the Nuggets have their number, and it's just hilarious I would even put them in here. The main reason, in my opinion, is that LeBron, of course, guarding Jokic in the Olympics. I thought he did a tremendous job. Jokic had 4 fouls during that fourth quarter for most of it, so I'm not trying to read into that too much, but I still feel like there's a silver bullet potential there when it comes to defending Jokic ball. With LeBron hitting the Jets button in the fourth quarter if need be. And then, of course, in my opinion, you just can't discount the Lakers from somehow finagling Zach LaVine or some other shit that, could potentially upend the balance of their offensive potency while retaining that defensive look potentially of Braun and AD sort of interchanging between Aaron Gordon and Jokic. Now on to ceiling factors. So the number one thing, in my opinion, mentioned it earlier, is the Jamal redemption component. Simply put, Jamal must improve his offensive potency, and that's in order to help his overall team just score more points and be more productive. But it's also going to wear Jokic the fuck out. And I think that if I were Michael Malone, that is really what I would be thinking about in the back of my head. Not to mention the fact that I think Jamal proved to be a little more emotionally volatile than maybe people wanted to admit when he has had tremendous outings and performances. It's cool. It's awesome. A lot of people love Jamal Murray for that fire and tough shot making and everything, and that's great. But when you are pretty emotionally volatile and what have you, and then you proceed to go on and shoot 29% from three and 47% true shooting in an entire playoff series, you start to wonder about the seesawing effect of that kind of play style. And of course, now they're implanting Russ, and we'll see how that gels as far as bringing that spark plug energy to the team instead of kind of relying on Jamal, which I think was one of the issues last season when Jamal wasn't shooting very well. It's kind of tough to feel that fire and juice really get brought when the guy's kind of breaking shots. So that's that. The other part is around Christian Braun as a starter. Very, very obvious here. I think the synergy with the starting unit as a 30-plus minute per game guy, again, Michael Malone loves to ride his starters out during the season here. I think that synergy may take some time, truly, especially when it comes to the offensive end of the floor, understanding his adjustments in spacing and building up that confidence as a starter in his third year in the NBA to knock down really tough shots and then also knock down clutch shots. They are going to need it for all of the reasons I just finished outlining when they're going up against Jaren Jackson and Zach Edey and Braun and AD and Hardenstein and Chet. And now the list is pretty long here as far as what kind of obstacles we have going up against Jokic ball. Christian Braun is going to be a very important piece for them. And so we will see how that ends up looking like. Yeah, to me, the most important item to monitor will just be the outside shooting and the potency. We'll see what his attempts really become there. The other thing worth pointing out as well is in the playoffs this past year, Christian Braun averaging 5 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist in only 17 minutes a game. KCP averaging 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. I know very reductive takes, and you see them all the time on Twitter of, yeah, Christian Braun with more minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, KCP was 35 minutes a game. I don't know if I said that or not. Christian Braun was only 17. But you see a lot of discourse online where it's like, oh, yeah, Christian Braun upping his minutes can easily put up that same level of production. I think the flip side that I just want to call out here is I think that line of thinking might be a little wishful in that, sure, more minutes mean more opportunity, but I don't know if it's as simple as it's always just additive. Christian Braun's athleticism and youth and all of those things, I think, matter, of course, but it's where I start to think about the game within the game. And can he mentally and psychologically be tracking, certain matchups, even going, he only averaged 1 assist, KCP 3, things like that. Can you understand guys' schemes on your own team and what they're trying to do? I don't know if, he's probably going to be utilized mostly as just a spot-up shooter. If you get the ball, either put it up if you have any space or put it on the deck and make that read. That read is, I really think, what can elevate this starting unit for Denver, because as good as KCP is, in my opinion, he's not a facilitator. I don't trust him, quite frankly, shooting the ball anywhere besides outside of the three-point arc. And so as Christian Braun, I think, gets more comfortable rising and firing off the catch, but then also leveraging that quickness, obviously in transition, but otherwise as well, I think is going to present an opportunity to even embolden and embellish the potency of this offensive unit. And so I just want to put that up there. A couple different factors at play. I don't think it's as simple as just more time equals more production. Guys are going to catch on to him defensively, and also that game within the game of being an NBA starter, potentially in the conference finals as a third-year player in the entire league. I think that there might be a little more synergy and need to, kind of integrate than maybe we think. Getting situated and thinking about this upcoming season. That being said, again, Jokic is by far the best player on the planet, and, Christian Braun has been averaging playoff minutes to begin with, so, we'll see. I think also, obviously, KCP having won a title as well, just intangible things. So upside for Christian Braun, leverage his athleticism to up fake, drive in, facilitate a little bit. That's what I'll be curious about. Probably second, right below his 3-point attempt / efficiency. But there is great upside there. Again, because of his youth and physical tools, I think that's going to help. In addition to that is withstanding the psychological feat and just overall experience of being in a game, in all these games for that many minutes a night, is going to be a different type of experience for Christian Braun. And let alone in a entirely upgraded level of competition in the Western Conference, with Dallas and Memphis, in my estimation, are just going to be right up there with Oklahoma City and Minnesota. There is a real possibility that Denver finds itself in the 6th seed. I'm not even kidding, in the 6th or 5th seed, coming around the corner in like February and March or something, and they're like, oh shit, Christian Braun, you're playing like 38 minutes a night, and then right into the postseason, where we all just saw the first edition of that film series. So the last thing, I touched on it earlier, is the juice featuring Westbrook. Not a knock on Jokic's leadership style whatsoever. I think that these are just humanic attributes and things, who he is as a person. Like I said before, he seemed entirely complacent with Jamal Murray shouldering that spark plug court leadership presence, and then just absolutely just nuking every single team virtually by himself. But again, when you find yourself in an 0-2 hole or something like that, I think that that juice was something that the Nuggets realized they needed reinforcements on. And Jamal's shooting woes, I think, blunted the potency or flammability of that galvanizing energy that, you know, Jamal Murray brings. When he's on, it's awesome, and you feel it, and it's electrifying and everything. But if he's not, it's going to be tough. And so I think that was probably the biggest reason they acquired Russell Westbrook. The transition running, easy basket pushing and stuff like that is probably second. Westbrook in transition is still very attention grabbing for the defense. I was going to say potent, but his rim finishing has not been great for some time, and everybody knows that. But I think his playmaking out of those situations and fast break situations is still potent. And especially on a team where you heard Aaron Gordon last playoffs when he talks about being selfless, hopefully some of that instructive energy finds itself landing in Russ, and he is able to channel that energy into being selfless on the floor, leveraging his physical tools that he somehow still has. I mean, he still has to be in the top 7 or 8 most athletic players in the league at like 35 or whatever it is, to really help Denver get on a run. They need to be faster. They were like 29th in pace last year. A big part of that, Jamal Murray. But then also bring that fire, regardless if you're in an 0-2 hole or not, regardless if you're going up against, let's say, even the reigning champs in the Boston Celtics or something. I mean, that dude does not give a flying fuck about who is on the other side of the court. And especially when you think about KCP, outside of, I guess, everyone besides Russ, but before their first ring, KCP was the only one with championship pedigree, right? KCP is the only one with a ring, and everybody else in the Denver Nuggets team at that point really hadn't. Westbrook, I think, is going to very much amplify Jamal's energy, or really sustain it in your different lineups as you think about what sort of guys and what sort of situations and scenarios you'll find yourself in the postseason, be it another rat race that closes season and the starters having to play 36, 37, 38 minutes a game in the last several, or more than several regular season games right into the postseason. Having a guy that's basically an Energizer Bunny is just going to be really important. And on top of that, I think the edge is also going to be really important as far as, getting on Christian Braun for fucking up and missing rotations or some shit like that, or on offense, you know what I mean? Like, that kind of edge is something that I think this team needs. And even looking at their roster here, DeAndre Jordan, I know there's a really strong affinity and love for him in the locker room. I don't think it is the same thing as oh my god, as what the fuck? Oh, Haslam. Yeah. I don't think it's the same kind of energy as Udonis Haslam on the Heat or something like that, where it's a little more gruff, it's a little more old school veteran presence of get your fucking shit together and focus right now. I think DJ is a little more soft-spoken and kind of a little more, I don't want to say cheerleady, I don't want to be mean, but you know what I'm kind of saying. Russ is the kind of guy that's going to be a little more in that Udonis Haslem end of the spectrum, and he's going to fucking ride you if you fuck it up. And granted, great benefits there, getting guys juiced up, confident on the court, etc. We'll see about his integration on the court, particularly with Jamal Murray. I know people have already shined a light on that kind of clash, potential clash. Honestly, for a team that's contending for a title, as off the rails as Russ gets, I truly believe, particularly in this stage of his career, he's going to be able to get a handle on it and really not infringe on this sort of sacred system that Denver has employed to an extremely successful extent these last handful of seasons. And ultimately, I think having a guy in Jokic who is able to produce so consistently and effectively, I actually like the idea that it would probably, if anything, be like a Russ versus Jamal type of thing and not a Russ versus Jokic thing, because he just seems incapable of caring enough, which actually I think is an overarching help and positive thing for the team, let alone the fact that Russ kind of riding Jamal, if he continues to suck at shooting, might actually, again, inspire or motivate Jamal to suck less in general, right? Okay, cool. The last thing I do want to call out here is the Dario Saric thing. I think that's really cool. I don't think in terms of actual offensive potency is obviously that incredible anymore. Just thinking back to the last time most of us probably saw him over with Golden State. But the feel for the game is there. The outside shooting is relatively there. Again, I do elevate that a bit with your Jokic's as far as generating very open shots for him. I have no qualms about him making like 38% with the kind of degree of looks that he'll get. It'll be very interesting to see about the lineup staggering if he does get any, ability to share meaningful minutes with Jokic. And come the postseason, I don't think I necessarily see a ton of minutes coming his way. Although we'll see how this works. I mean, as that backup big to Jokic, Aaron Gordon showed a lot of positive flashes in terms of emulating the Jokic ball, getting himself in the post, playing out of it, making the right reads, the 1-2 step, get the second guy to come over to help and make the dump off pass. Like, I think both him and Saric proved to be pretty effective there. And he seems to be a player very good at sticking to his role, not overdoing anything. I mean, the worst thing he'll do is probably miss shots that he should be taking. He's just not the type of player who's going to force shots at all. And again, with this feel for the game, I think it is going to work, projectedly work pretty seamlessly. So I don't necessarily see that as an enormous ceiling raiser or anything else like that. Again, the defense is really going to be a huge issue, and that's why he is where he is in his career. But when you think about the offensive potency, that revisiting full circle here, that is where Denver struggled the most this past postseason, was volatile shooting from MPJ and Jamal Murray. Saric at least being able to be a connective cog in the system, your Kyle Anderson types, like stuff like that, is only going to be helpful for kind of lathering this entire system to help it propel itself inside of those non-Jokic minutes. I also kind of like the anti-symmetry between him and Russ, and the fact that Russ can run 1,000,000 miles an hour, but Saric can't really move. This is kind of interesting to me. We'll see. Especially Russ off ball, if there's anything else he can do there. All right, super long, guys. I apologize if I kind of revisited too much. I'm not going to apologize. What the fuck am I saying? That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm trying to burn through this series and try to be as succinct and informative as I possibly can. Obviously, a lot goes into this. Please check out my Twitter if you want to see any of these actual profiles. I'll also put them in the description down below. If you want to basically see a summary of each of the points that I kind of highlighted here, I've probably embedded it throughout this video. I am overall extremely confident in Denver's ability, everything we've seen from their best player and even the moves that they were able to make over the offseason with Russ and integrating Christian Braun, etc. I am still extremely confident in totality in this team's ability and potency come the postseason. It's really going to be a test now of, did we learn our lessons from last year and staying healthy, riding out the regular season, understanding the context of the conference and how it's really hard to take days or games off. Granted, it'll be helpful now with Russ and Christian Braun, these young, just athletic legs to just drive the ship a little bit more in the regular season. But that's where I'll be looking. Christian Braun shooting, Westbrook integration from a cultural and energy and spark perspective, and how can we make those non-Jokic minutes not some of the worst, most grotesque basketball our eyeballs have ever seen. All right. Thank you guys so much, and until next time.